Hello. Do you happen to know? Oh, hang on, wait. Let me make sure I'm not on bound. How long can you audio stream to
happening. Hello,
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi.
Are we
Good
all
afternoon,
in?
everyone.
Hello, here's Andre.
Just waiting on Trudy.
Trudy's running a minute late. I just had a phone call from Rachel to say that she's just a tad delayed.
Okay.
Um,
Should we just change the order and then that's all we carry on as normal?
she said it was literally 1 minute. I've only just got on. I've been waiting for the host to let me into this meeting. I don't know.
Yeah, I was waiting until everyone got here.
All right. Okay. Who's
Yes, I apologize.
Is that Neville talking?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay. A disembodied voice, you see.
Yes, I haven't got my camera on at the moment.
Okay. Who else have we not got?
Just Trudy.
Where's Arun?
Hello, I'm here. And I think we are live. So
Oh,
live on YouTube.
There you are.
Yep.
hello.
So I guess good afternoon to everyone watching on YouTube. Welcome to this panel session. Only nuclear can provide the energy we need. So this session has been organised by supporters of nuclear energy and is hosted by the COP26 delivery team on behalf of the Nuclear Institute YGN. During the discussion, we encourage viewers to submit questions for the panelists via the YouTube comment section. And the panelists are ready, and they will be introduced by our moderator for discussion, Neville Chamberlain. Neville is the chair of the supporters of nuclear energy with over 60 years of experience in the nuclear industry. So over to you, Neville.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. It is actually very appropriate that we look at nuclear energy again as we prepare for next year's climate change conference, COP26 in Glasgow. With us to discuss that proposition that only nuclear can provide the energy the world needs, we've got 5 experts on our panel, each bringing his or her special personal viewpoint. So let me introduce them. I'm going to start with Andre Wakker, who is a private energy consultant from the Netherlands. And at one time, he was renewable energy policy advisor to the Dutch government. Andre also once did work for the Dutch nuclear research group in Khuttan. Then we have Zion Lights, an environmentalist and science communicator. Until recently, Zion was a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, but she resigned in order to free herself up to advocate clean energy, such as nuclear. Arun Khuttan is also with us. He's a young nuclear scientist leading the preparations for COP26 on behalf of the Nuclear Institute's young generation. He's a member of the Nuclear Industry Association's Next Generation Council. And we also have Tim Stone, who is chairman of the Nuclear Industry Association. Tim was a former energy advisor to no less than 5 secretaries of state across 2 different governments. Our 5th panelist will be Trudy Harrison, MP for Copeland and Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Prime Minister. Trudy's constituency covers the Sellafield nuclear plant in Cumbria, and indeed she once worked at the plant herself. She's not able to join us just yet. Parliamentary business, I'm afraid, has deflected her. Trudy is here, I am told. I haven't got a picture of her, but Trudy is here. Hello, Trudy. Perfect timing.
Yes, I'm definitely here in person.
Well, we've just gone through the introductions, and indeed, I'm going to put you up first while we've got you. Each panelist is going to give us a few minutes on just why he or she supports the proposition that only nuclear can provide the energy the world needs. And then after that, after each of our 5 panelists have given us their take, we shall turn over the issue for general discussion and take questions from our audience. And as you've heard earlier, you can use a chat box on YouTube to put your questions through to us. So let's make a start. Trudy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Neville, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It reminded me of wonderful conversations I had early on in my career, actually, with yourself and with Wade Allison. And I'm delighted to see that Wade is joining today as well. I know that many of you in front of me, we've met to discuss Moorside, Sellafield, and the nuclear industry generally across the UK and beyond. So I've said this many times, that my interest in nuclear is personal, it's professional, and it's political. It's personal because I was born in 1976 in the village of Seascale, which is the village closest to Sellafield. My grandparents were farmers in Seascale, so they'd endured some of the trials and tribulations. My mum was born in 52 in that village. So the fire of 56 really hurt their business. But we've come through a long way in terms of nuclear perception, nuclear journeys. And so as I was growing up, I would say I'd go on holiday and mention I was from, the Lake District. People maybe didn't know about Scawfell or Wastwater. But the moment I mentioned Sellafield, it was a kind of, oh, you must glow in the dark. And I was, I suppose, fairly hurt by this, a little bit ashamed, humiliated. And I suppose growing up and having my first job at Sellafield when I was 16, it made me realise, actually, this perception is not valid. We've come a long way, the professionalism, the accountability, the traceability, and most importantly, I think at Sellafield, it's been the kind of public honesty that we have undertaken, and the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority in the Office of Nuclear Regulations has very much helped professionalise that industry. So the dial has definitely turned locally, and personally, I absolutely believe in nuclear power, nuclear energy as the way to reduce our carbon emissions, but also the way to level up, the way to provide really good quality jobs and apprenticeships in my local area, but right across the country as well. And I think politically, us political leaders need to take the decision now, because nuclear is a long-term game. Parliamentary terms, perhaps not in the last few years, because I'm on my 3rd election in 4 years, but certainly a parliamentary term of 5 years is far too short to see out a nuclear policy. So it needs to be long term. And I'm very excited about the white paper that's coming out in November and the associated economic statement from the Chancellor. And then I look forward to the siting policy and the financial models as we develop both small modular reactors and I hope large scale reactors in and around the Sellafield area, but right across the UK as well, to create high quality jobs, to create jobs across the supply chain, to create a fantastic export opportunity as we have done before, to hit that goal of net zero by 2050, and also to ensure that British reactors are back in our country and being exported across the globe as well. So I'm really excited about Rolls-Royce.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Trudy. Andre, would you like to give us your take on this proposition?
Yes, please. I've been able to take a deep dive into the energy transition since 20 years. I've done renewables and I've done nuclear. And what I would like to do with the viewers this afternoon is one, to give a brief introduction in the strengths of nuclear technology, nuclear energy, where we stand today. And also what needs to change in the Western world to get nuclear going again. So here's my pitch. Dear viewers, so nuclear energy is the greatest triumph in energy history. Since Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, nuclear power has been the only source that has helped us to get us rid of our fossil energy addiction. And today, actually, 450 nuclear reactors supplies from 6 to 7% of all our energy worldwide. That's a fact. And it's actually more than all the other clean energy sources, hydro, solar, and wind together. Had the growth of nuclear energy not been slowed down by the Chernobyl accident, this share could actually have been 15% today. Realize that. Then we wouldn't have had any more coal-fired power plant stations here in the West today. They would have been gone, basically. Now, the strength, of course, dear viewers, comes from the ultra-high energy density. The typical modern nuclear power station provides sufficient power to power a metropolis using only half a liter of fuel. That's much less than the truckloads of gas that would be needed for that, or the mountains of coal. Or compare it with solar and wind. The small nuclear power reactor of Borselen in the Netherlands supplies as much power as the solar panels that are installed in 1 million roofs in the Netherlands today. Or 2 modern nuclear power stations would provide the same amount of power as those mega wind turbines, thousands mega wind turbines that will be installed on the beautiful North Sea in 2030. Realize that. Because a nuclear power plant is actually a concentrated heat source, you can use it for heat as well. And in Russia and Eastern Europe, Switzerland, that's already the case. Generation 4 nuclear power plants also provide hydrogen. So basically, nuclear power, I have come to this conviction, is actually the only energy source that completely replaces fossil energy in all its functionalities. And due to its large scale, its day and night availability, it's unquestionably also very competitive with any alternative. And therefore all authoritative energy projections show a worldwide growth of nuclear energy, and China is actually leading the way. Now, despite all this success, the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, and an army of green prophets have actually been quite successful in sabotaging nuclear energy. And basically, the power of nuclear, its invisibility, is at the same time its weakness. Something must be wrong there in that dome, thinks the uninformed citizen. And actually, the fear for the invisible, along with the metaphysical fear for radiation, have been exploited to the full by the anti-nuclear energy lobby. However, libraries of independent scientific research, often conducted under UN umbrella, show that all of these myths and pseudoscience, actually nothing remains. And I'll mention a few. Myth number 1, nuclear is not sustainable. That's wrong. We find uranium and thorium everywhere, and there's enough for 1,000 years. And with generation 4 reactors, which actually close the nuclear fuel cycle, the potentially becomes infinite. And per unit of energy, nuclear uses much less steel and much less concrete as solar and wind. And for solar and wind, you also need storage of batteries, you need all the grids, etc., etc. Actually, looking at nuclear energy basically means that nuclear saves our climate, saves our nature, saves our space, saves our natural reserves, whilst remaining 24/7 available and affordable. Actually, nuclear is greener than green, dear viewers. Then, myth number 2, nuclear energy is dangerous. That's wrong also. Chernobyl is the only accident that has caused victims, actually 62 to be precise. It's much safer than fossil, biomass and hydropower. The Fukushima evacuation has caused more suffering than it prevented. And Chernobyl is since long a beautiful nature reserve and a tourist attraction as well. Myth number 3, nuclear waste is dangerous. That's wrong. All nuclear waste from 1 century actually fits in one sports hall. And that bit of nuclear waste is stored much safer than all other industrial waste, which is just as dangerous, but 1,000 times more extensive. When the radiation is gone after some 150 years, actually what remains is basically chemical waste. and that can be stored in deep geological repositories. And that's already a proven solution. Actually, Sweden, Finland, France, and even Germany can start storage tomorrow if they want to. It's actually the green politics that is holding it back. And the last myth actually is that nuclear energy is expensive. Well, that's also wrong, because nuclear is more efficient and larger in scale than any alternative. Nuclear energy is simply competitive. And it's not without reason that the operating life of nuclear power plants is being extended all over the world. Prerequisite, of course, is that the nuclear power plant can continue to supply energy for 80 to 100 years, and that the permit procedure for new builds is in place. Now, with the monopoly for green energy, specifically in the European Union, these conditions have disappeared, unfortunately. And in fact, the only way to stop nuclear energy is to legally ban it, as is the case in Germany, or to discriminate it, as in the Green Deal of the EU. So this is my pitch. I conclude with what actually has to be changed to get nuclear going again in the Western world. Well, two things. One, politically, all green deals have to become clean deals. So a new level playing field for nuclear has to be created. And that's not a matter of money or subsidies. As long as solar, wind, and biomass get priority access to the energy grid, above all other options, including nuclear, with ever increasing mandatory targets for this green energy, the business case for nuclear will be weak. But basically, countries that want to power their entire systems on nuclear should be free to do so. And this is currently not the case, certainly not in the EU. Second, I firmly believe actually, I've worked in the industry myself, is that the industry itself should reach out to the general public with a compelling narrative. And after 60 years of nuclear triumph, the industry still doesn't know how to do this. They talk to the public in the same way as they talk to me, to experts, facts and science-based. That's all fine. But for those who are really interested, facts on nuclear can be found almost anywhere. And it's not the facts that make the difference, it's the narrative. So the industry is not present in the late night shows. They are not present in the energy transition debates. They may write decent politically correct position papers, but they are invisible to the public. Actually, Greenpeace marketing is much better. I conclude, in my view, I'm actually convinced, and that's my experience, sun, wind, heat pumps, geothermal energy, these are actually all expensive drops in the ocean. You cannot extinguish a raging fire with buckets of water. You need the fire trucks for that, the nuclear power station. So if we want to save the planet, we have to continue with what we started 60 years ago, build nuclear power plants. Thanks very much.
Well done, Andre. Thank you very much for that. Zion, can I bring you in next to speak to us? Where are we? Yes, good. Over to you, Zion.
Great, thank you, Neville. So my conversion to nuclear has been quite unusual. About 18 years ago, I was campaigning for 100% renewable energy. Now, you may laugh, but in the environmental movement of which I've been a member, an active participant for most of my life, it's very normal to be anti-nuclear. It's very normal to just believe the myths around you, and no one's doing it deliberately. No one sits you down and says, you need to believe these myths, but they're sort of perpetuated by the people who are around you and the stories they tell. And, you know, popular culture doesn't help. You know, things like The Simpsons kind of give you this image of waste being really bad, the industry is really bad. You get all these ideas in your head and you don't tend to question them. And it's very unusual to be in any kind of tribal group or family and actually question, you know, people's beliefs. This is just, we are just naturally tribal beings, right? This is an evolutionary thing that you don't go against your tribe because then you're much less likely to survive. So that was my tribe for a long time. I was campaigning for 100% renewables. I was active in the Green Party. They published a report on how to get to kind of zero carbon Britain, I think it was called. And I looked really carefully at this report and I saw that it relied on a very significant reduction of personal use of energy. And that was kind of the bit that tripped me up, that I really wanted to agree with it because everybody was praising it and I was going to these conferences and it was being talked about, and I kind of just couldn't. There's just that little thing that I just couldn't get behind. You know, my parents migrated here in the 70s. They left behind their family in India, in the Punjab. They left behind their home country in order to have a higher quality of life that has only come through this kind of energy, you know, a high energy way of life. There's no question there, but this is not really an issue that comes up in those green movements at all. There's very much a soul voice thinking about them. And so I went to a conference. It was a Green Party conference on energy, and I kind of tried to ask these questions, and I found that, you know, there wasn't a lot of people just weren't receptive to them. And somebody actually came over to me afterwards and said she's really concerned that I was being pro-nuclear. And at that point I was not pro-nuclear, I was just asking questions. But it made me uncomfortable that it wasn't okay to ask questions. I think it's always important to be able to do that. And actually, if you're really sure that you're correct, why can't you hear the other side? You know, it's not going to hurt you to hear the other side. If anything, it will just make you more confident in your position. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's an engineer, and I said, can you tell me a little bit about some of these things that I believe? You know, one of my beliefs was that millions of people have been killed, you know, by radiation. It's just you could pick any environmentalist off the street and this is what people believe. You know, you can laugh at it. These myths are coming from somewhere, constantly perpetuated. You just believe it. My friend sent me a single scientific paper that showed me that wasn't true, that no one had died from radiation at Fukushima. It's completely, you know, turned my belief system on. And it's very difficult as well when that happens to actually accept it and to just say, you know what, I'm just going to change my mind. Because actually then I went with that paper into some of these groups that I'd been, you know, a lifelong member of, you know, and people didn't want to hear it. People didn't want to see it. It was completely even challenging their identity. For some people, it was challenging their identity. And I realized that the way that I'd gone to them with that paper was not the right way to communicate. So I went back to university and I studied for a master's in science communication because I wanted to know how to talk to people who have very different views to you, how you get through to them. And it's true, it's not just, you know, throwing facts at people. In fact, it's the first thing they teach you on my master's is, you know, it's called the deficit model. It's this idea that you're kind of a fountain of knowledge, you're a jug of knowledge, everyone else is an empty cup and you fill them up. Don't do it, basically. That's the takeaway message. The deficit model has been proven time and time again. It's not the way to communicate to people. And so I went from, you know, being quite anti-nuclear to being an advocate. But for a while, this meant that I was kind of trudging along on my own, and I still had these questions about energy use in my mind. And part of me thought, well, maybe we can bring down our carbon footprints. You know, I don't drive. I have quite a low carbon footprint. I wrote an entire book on this issue. It was evidence-based, just kind of like, what can you actually do to bring down your carbon footprint? And the fact is that when I looked at the numbers, even though I was doing it and I was encouraging people to do it, when I looked at the numbers, it just isn't enough. It's just not enough. No one wants to hear this, but it's true. We cannot bring down our personal emissions. We just can't do it. Not enough to meet a net zero 2050 target. And at the same time, campaigners are calling for that target to be brought forward. And I agree, you know, we should do it as soon as possible, but we cannot do it by reducing our footprints. We are talking about going back to living in a way that people live in these countries, like where my parents came from, where they don't have, you know, reliable energy. They don't have, in fact, they barely have electricity. You know, they just have to deal with it. They don't have the infrastructure that we have, and it's horrible. It's a horrible way to live. They live in poverty. No one wants to live in poverty, you know, and we don't deserve to. And this is a really fundamental thing that I've been saying to people, is that humans are good. You know, yes, we have caused this pollution and we have made this mistake with fossil fuels, but we didn't do it on purpose, and we can fix it. We don't deserve to suffer. Nobody deserves to suffer. If anything, we need to lift as many people out of poverty as possible. And, you know, going back to somewhere like the Punjab, you know, quite a lot of India, they are suffering, you know, they are not only in poverty, but now suffering the consequences of climate change. Drought is becoming more common. Water shortages are becoming more common. How are they going to deal with this without abundant energy? And now we don't want them to do it because we don't want them to use fossil fuels. I completely understand that. I've read the IPCC report. We need to stop pumping this stuff into the atmosphere, right? I get it. CO2, we need to stop doing it. We can't really tell them not to do it because it's what we did. So there's something in this about, you know, what I call energy justice, where we really, I think, have a moral obligation to get our emissions down to net zero as soon as possible, to allow other countries to have the development that they need so that they can have a higher quality of life. They can have the standard of living that we have benefited from for a long time because we burned fossil fuels. You know, that's the fact of it. And there's no reason really that we can't achieve it. You know, sometimes I think we're wandering around acting like a poor country. We are not a poor country. We have all of these options at our fingertips. We can build nuclear on an exponential scale. You know, if you look at France's energy mix, fantastic energy security policy, over 70% from nuclear. They've been doing that for a long time. And over here, it's kind of chugging along at 20%. You know, what's going to happen when so a lot of our reactors are due to shut down. 14 of our 15 operational reactors are due to shut down by 2030. At the moment, you know, that's not going to be replaced. It could be replaced by two really powerful EPRs, that's Sizewell C and Hinkley Point C, but at the moment, Sizewell hasn't been given the go-ahead. We've also just lost Wilfer. You know, these are really bad things. We're talking about there being a climate emergency. We've got to put our money where our mouth is. When we talk about climate change, all we're talking about is bringing down emissions. And I've had people say to me, well, fine, but why don't you advocate for rewilding, or why don't you advocate for something else? And those are, you know, there's lots of good people doing, you know, campaigning and crunching numbers in those areas. But if you look at our energy needs, you know, this is the biggest slice of the pie. It's like 70% of our emissions are from this part of the pie. This is the bit that we have to deal with. We don't want to go back to having no electricity, and we certainly don't want it to be sanctioned, which I think actually is the end game. If we don't sort it out and we don't have clean, abundant energy for all of us, and cheap energy, you know, it's equal for everyone. If we don't have that, then at some point there will be sanctions that tell us that we have to reduce our needs. And even then, you know, there's still going to be an issue of other countries needing to develop. If we could lead the way on this, you know, we're really just dragging our feet, but we could absolutely lead the way. I mean, I just, you know, fingers crossed for some leader who just comes out and says, yes, we are going to build not just Sizewell, but Moorside and Wilfer, and we are going to build as much as we can. This is going to be our post-COVID recovery. This is going to bring us jobs, not just tens of thousands of jobs, but highly skilled jobs to keep our engineers in this country, you know, to provide innovation for things like SMRs, so that we can have that later down the line when we're able to build the advanced tech that sounds amazing, but we can't build yet. We've got to get our emissions down. We've got to have a real strategy reaching net zero by 2050. And I don't think I have to make the argument that nuclear is, you know, a big part of that, because the IPCC have already said it. These are top scientists. They've crunched the numbers. It's in the report. It has to be a big slice of the pie. And I just hope that, you know, by trying to shift public perception of it, and have these conversations, and trying to kind of, even in a way, rebrand nuclear as the clean solution it truly is, we can achieve that. Because otherwise, you know, we are in the 21st century, and we're using an old technology. There's no need for it. There's absolutely no need for it. I think we could do incredible things if we just put our faith in this incredible technology, really, which is a gift. It's a gift, and it's why I'm happy to advocate for it. It's what fire was for humans originally, right? We didn't have heat, we couldn't cook and get the most calories out of food. We discovered fire, we learned to harness fire. That's what nuclear is right now, and we need to realize that we can harness this for the good of everybody. Thank you.
Very powerful stuff, Zion. Thank you very much for that. I have to say, your reference to the Indian situation resonated with me, because I remember very clearly going with the World Energy Congress to India for Congress, and we were embarrassed, quite frankly, to be part of an energy industry that was effectively taking part in an exercise which gave individual people in India so little energy. It was embarrassing. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Zion. That was very good. Arun, are you with us still, Arun?
I am, yes, hello.
It's your turn.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And I'm going to try something new. So hopefully this works and you can see my presentation, which I'll try and interact with. And similarly to Zion, actually, I have a similar story. My parents also have to be from Punjab in India, and they grew up and traveled over here in the 80s. My dad would tell me stories of how he grew up in extreme poverty, tell me stories of how he had to borrow money to buy a shirt just so he could go to school, and other stories of how he was holding up his house with his family in torrential rain during monsoon season, just so that they could survive. He's told me all these stories, and I remember visiting India when I was quite young, and there was, going back to the village, it was really interesting to see. There wasn't much running water, electricity was intermittent, there were blackouts, people rode bicycles, sometimes you'd see a scooter, there were flat toilets, and let's see if I can get these slides going. Here's a picture of me with my uncle, actually, in India. So Miguel or Neville, tell me if it's really unclear, but hopefully you can see that. And you see the house in the background kind of doesn't really have a roof. But as time went on, I kind of went back over the years and got a little bit older, and it's another picture a few years later, and things seemed to change very quickly. Electricity was still intermittent, but it was getting better. There was a standing toilet for the first time, which was a big relief. There was running water, better sanitation services, and they actually had a fridge for the first time. They never had a fridge before. People were starting to ride motorbikes more often. So the energy use was really increasing. They went from having almost nothing to having like a fridge. That's almost like an exponential rise in energy use. Now, I recently read this book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, and it's a really eye-opening book, and I would recommend it. If you have read it, leave a comment in the YouTube box. But what he describes are these 4 levels in the world, and each one of these little people here depict about 1 billion people, and he separates it by the amount they earn per day. So on the left-hand side, you have people earning less than $8 or $2 per day, and these people live in extreme poverty. And then up on this side, level 4 is what we're all used to. It's where we are and how we're able to view this webinar over the internet. That's about 1 billion people in the world have that privilege. What I described was my relatives in India moving from level 2 to level 3. Services increased and improved, and things got better. So 4 billion people still live in poverty. And as we move up, the energy use is projected to explode, and it already has been. So in the last 50 to 70 years, it's just a time of global energy consumption. There's been a quadrupling in the amount of energy we use. And to this day, in 2019, that's in last year, 85% of energy was still coming from fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. That's a huge amount, and we've known about the issues for a long time. Over the next 30 years, energy is predicted to up to maybe double, increase by 50% to double. So as well as decarbonizing 85% of what we already produce globally, we've got to almost recreate that again in low carbon terms. So how do we do that? So this is a graph from a website, Our World in Data, and another one of Hans Rosling's spin-offs, but this graph, it might be difficult to see, but along the bottom you have your greenhouse gas emissions, and along the side you've got your death rate from accidents and air pollution. So we know coal is bad and oil is bad, huge emissions and huge death rates. So we want to focus on what's down here in the bottom left. So if we zoom in, we want to be doing as much of this as possible, everything on here: nuclear energy, wind, solar, hydropower, and maybe biomass to a degree, but you can see there are greenhouse gas emissions related to that. You might be surprised to see that nuclear actually has lower greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, than wind and solar in some cases, and on par death rates, so it is extremely safe. So we need to be throwing as much of this at the problem that we can. The options are clear. So recently, a few governments and publications have come out with hydrogen as being a source, as an energy carrier to be used to decarbonize the hard to decarbonize areas, such as aviation, shipping, industrial processes. Until we go electric with everything, we're going to need to do something in between. So how we produce hydrogen is going to be important. We need to produce it in a low carbon way. So the next few graphs are coming out of a really recent Clean Energy Ministerial report funded by NICE. And it shows the amount of area required, and this is for the UK, required to replace the UK's current oil consumption with hydrogen generated from either wind in purple, the amount of offshore land you'd use, solar in yellow, or advanced heat sources you'll see in this little green speck over here, such as nuclear energy. So we need to get really realistic on what our impacts to ecology and nature will have if we're going to go full renewables. Similarly for Japan, huge amounts of offshore land required for wind. Similarly, onshore solar, huge amounts of land. And this is just to replace Japan's current oil consumption with hydrogen. You can barely see the speck of green there, and that is the amount of land required for advanced heat sources and nuclear. And similarly for South Korea, I think the point is illustrated. So we need to be throwing as much nuclear at this issue as we can. And next year, as Neville's mentioned, COP26 is coming to the UK, and we've got a real opportunity to get nuclear at the table. Now the YGN, the Nuclear Institute YGN, so the Nuclear Institute is the UK's professional membership body, and I'm with the YGN, and we're going to be going to the COP26 to make sure that nuclear is at the table. For too long, it's not been on the table due to the stigma attached to it, but we need to recognise its place at the table. So what are we doing at the YGN? We are tasked with encouraging, developing, and engaging the public and young professionals. We really want to shape the future and engage with other young activists in the world and make sure that everybody understands the benefits of nuclear. We haven't even begun to touch on some of the other areas, such as nuclear medicine, which saves millions of lives. Now, nuclear does save millions of lives because we're not burning coal and not gas and oil. And through that, we do save a lot more lives than I think it's given credit for. So what can you do at home? I'd suggest you write a letter to your MP or local representative internationally, showing your support for nuclear, and let them know that you want this to be on the table at COP26. COP21 in Paris resulted in landmark agreements to get to limit greenhouse gas emissions and climate change to 2 degrees. We can go even further at COP26 next November. So we're going to be doing a lot over the next year. You can follow us on our social media and see how you can get involved. But yeah, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and don't be afraid to reach out and get involved. We need everybody on board. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Arun. That's very interesting. Our fifth and final presenter is Tim Stone. Tim, from the Nuclear Industry Association.
Thank you, Neville. Thank you. I also chair Nuclear Risk Insurers, so we insure 324 licensed sites around the world. So I have a different perspective on risk here, but I'm absolutely crystal clear that, as everybody else has said, we have no choice. The pace and scale of change that we have to drive between now and 2050 it's not just industrial revolution scale, it's wartime crisis scale. Just to get the maths in the UK, to decarbonise, we have to replace the fossil power. It's 4.5 times the current electricity generating capacity of new primary energy that you need to replace that. There are only 2 places that primary energy comes from, and it's either yet more electricity in cubic shed loads, or hydrogen from steam reforming or from high temperature production. That's it. There's no other magic bullet here. And in terms of producing that scale of power, there are only 2 gigawatt scale deliverable power sources today: offshore wind and big nuclear. Nothing else does gigawatt scale fast enough. And to pick Zion's point, you can't wait. It doesn't matter what turns up in 2030 or 2035. It's too late already. We have to have our foot right to the floor with as many large gigawatt scale developments as you possibly can running in parallel. I want to pick a couple of other points on the way past here though. So the first strap line I want people to use is, this is not a Tesco problem where every little helps. Every lot helps. You really need to ram this into people's minds that you can't deal with this by turning off the odd phone charger or 2. This is about big stuff. And I'll come on to one of the side effects of the big stuff in a minute. You're actually building a brand new energy system. The system that we have now is designed to shift power from the coal fields to the manufacturing centres, neither of which we have anymore. Rebuilding all that isn't just a case of building stuff, but it has to be thought through as a system. And if we get that system wrong, we are playing with the economic competitiveness of the UK for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So this has to be thought through quite carefully and really quickly. Going along with this, there's often people talking about the price of electricity and how I'm sick to death of hearing people saying £92.50 at Hinkley is outrageous. Well, first of all, it's cheaper than the vast bulk of all the renewables deals that were put in place before that, firstly. Secondly, That's what happens if you have an inappropriate cost of capital. So some of you know I'm an ex-banker. The impact of the cost of capital on nuclear electricity price is spectacular. And with a rational, sensible approach to financing, big nuclear now is competitive with the latest offshore wind. So if Sizewell is built, and if Wilver is built with a sensible financing structure, you end up with electricity prices in the low 40s pounds per megawatt hour. Simple as that. And not to produce the lowest cost of capital possible is by accident, at least, putting a tax on the future energy use in the UK and damaging our competitiveness. We cannot allow this to happen. This then leads on to what happens over the next few weeks. The government in the UK is going to be making some very big decisions over the future energy policy. In doing that, they will be creating a legacy of the sort of scale of 1948 in the welfare state. The question is, will it be a positive legacy or a negative legacy? It's down to them. The government have an option, they have a choice to make this happen. But on behalf of all citizens in the UK, we have to produce an energy system that makes the most sense for our children, our grandchildren, because it's that scale of time that these decisions affect. And we don't, I think, have the moral right not to do the best we can. And we know the best we can now. So I just hand over back to Whitehall in due course to help make those rational decisions. But the answer to me is completely crystal clear. And I'm not just pro-nuclear. If it's low carbon, safe and cheap, I'm very happy. But nuclear is one of the very few ways of delivering gigawatt scale power quickly. And back to earlier comments about Wilver is perfectly deliverable. There is an alternative proposal in front of government right now, which will deliver electricity at the same sort of price as Sizewell. And we need not just one big technology going forwards, but we need several to avoid eggs in baskets risks that we currently have with AGRs. So in the medium term, I really hope that the SMRs come through and can deliver gigawatt scale per year delivery in the way that the big ones can, but we just have to do everything we can right now, at which point I'll shut up and hand over back to Neville. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tim. Well, there we are. We've got a range of different perspectives, but obviously all with a similar underlying theme. I'm going to try and take one or two questions now, because we've got quite a lot. I've got quite a lot in front of me here. One is, there's been reference to COP26 several times. How can organisations such as the Nuclear Institute and indeed SONE best contribute to the COP26 debates? How can we get involved most effectively? Trudy, do you know the answer to that?
I would certainly give a steer, and what I would say is what I've heard so far are things that I've heard many times before, but I'm afraid, as you all know, we are guilty for speaking to like-minded people. And I know that because there are a number of emails I actually get, even in my Copeland area, where we have about 27,000 of the 80-odd thousand people working in industry living. So it's a very nuclear supportive area, but even I receive a very small amount of pro-nuclear emails and correspondence. So I can't imagine how much an MP from a non-nuclear area must receive. I suspect it's very little indeed. And that is the only reason why political leaders don't put this higher up the political agenda. It is purely down to public pressure. And Theon, I met with one of your colleagues from Extinction Rebellion. She got in touch with me. I think she was a kind of stakeholder relations lady, and I met with her purely to ask about her views on nuclear. And I was met with a pleasant response, but it was a little bit disappointing because it was a kind of, well, I actually do support nuclear, but we can't talk about that more widely. And I was also out with my husband, bless him, at a Grand Designs Live thing in Birmingham a couple of years ago, and Friends of the Earth had a big stadium centre point. I went to talk to them. What's your views on nuclear? Oh, no, we don't support that as a policy. The people that live in those nuclear communities get all sorts of weird jellyfish and other things washing up on their beach. And I saw my husband's face, who thought this was a day off, as I laid into them about, actually, that is such a pile of crap. but the public perception does go on. So communicating out to young people particularly, I think engineers and apprentices in the nuclear industry are really well placed to be doing this. They'll get the message out far better than politicians will, quite frankly. But putting pressure on politicians, and if I list them in order, I think Alex Sharma is absolutely brilliant. And it is he who will be leading COP26 because he's the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So reaching out to those ministers, Kwasi Kwarteng and Nadeem Zahawi and Alec will be really, really influential.
On that point, Trudy, would Alec allow a pro-nuclear lobby to be in attendance or take part in COP with a sidebar event or something like that?
I actually have no idea of the proceedings or etiquette or anything. I think if it wasn't maybe termed as a pro-nuclear lobby, but it was a pro-nuclear presentation, then, you know, why not? What's the harm in that? If it's based on fact, then I can't see any reason why not, and I would very much like to join. But I'm very happy to look into that and come back to you, Neville.
Okay, I think I think it would be important that such presentations would be open to challenge by people who didn't share the same views, but it's finding a way of talking to those who aren't natural followers of ours that you mentioned. We did a little bit like something like this in Kyoto, which was such a long time ago, most people have forgotten what Kyoto was about. But it was quite lively. And I don't think it's been encouraged since, probably because it was too lively.
Can I add something, Neville?
Yeah, go on, Arun.
Sorry, yeah, so as part of the YGN, we've been given NGO status and official observer status at COP next year. So we'll be planning lots of these kind of side events. So you have official side events at COP itself, where you have guest speakers and ways to interact with the ministers and legislators. So we'll be doing as much of that as we can and getting that young generation perspective, and especially engaging with the other young groups. So there's the Conference of Youth, who look at all types of renewable energies and provide a list of recommendations a week before to the COP proceedings. So I think, as well as making sure we engage with people outside of nuclear at COP, I think we've got a lot of work to do in the year running up to COP to make sure we are engaging with them and they're already on side at COP, and that way they help us and they're mutual allies, and we can really get the word through.
No, that's good. That's good. Anything you can do, Trudy, to help and encourage the minister to facilitate this sort of involvement would be very good, very helpful.
What I would also say is that there are two nuclear nuisances in Parliament, myself and Virginia Crosby. And the reason for that is we have communities that are utterly dependent on nuclear energy for survival or decommissioning in my case, but we're lobbying for nuclear energy. Now, I think it would be really beneficial if there was more understanding about how communities right across the UK benefited from nuclear, whether it's energy, you know, whether it's the design, like what happens at Risley around Warrington, whether it's the kind of cyber aspect, the supply chain, the components, the construction, all of that huge benefit from the nuclear industry, which is spread across the UK. If that was better known and communicated to the respective MPs, they would be more likely to hold Westminster Hall debates, German debates, general debates, speak up about nuclear, ask the minister about nuclear. And that's the way I think we would build a much bigger consensus for nuclear support.
Yeah, good.
So, Neville, if I may, the NIA is building up a big head of steam to hit COP26 as well. And we've got a current process going on where we're hitting every MP with any nuclear interest whatever to make sure that there's the ground debate going in there, for use a fishing analogy. But fundamentally, we want to be in the main room in COP26, not out in the field as the nuclear industry was in Madrid, but actually right in the middle of it. And there's going to be a lot of push. And frankly, the more progress that we make on nuclear in the UK, the more power that gives us to lean on ALOC, to lean on the Secretariat to make it happen. But it's, I think, morally indefensible to have COP26 without a discussion about the potential role of nuclear in there, particularly, as Arun was saying, if you look at the death rates per unit of electricity produced, we're right down at the bottom. Nuclear is safer than rooftop solar because the safety standards are higher and people don't fall off the roof installing nuclear power stations.
Good. Anybody else want to comment on this issue? I'll open another question then. I think Zion's gone some way to answering this one. Why do many environmentalists oppose nuclear? Do you want to add what you said earlier?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of myths perpetuated, and I think popular culture doesn't help. I think that actually, you know, Chernobyl happened, it wasn't as bad as it's been represented, but it's created a really good story. It's created a scary story for people to talk about. What I often compare it to is I'm an astronomer and I'm really into space science. Now, anybody here remember Challenger? Do you remember when Challenger blew up live on television, killed 7 people? Why didn't people respond the same way? You know, the Chernobyl blast killed 12 people, but why didn't people respond the same way to Challenger? You don't get people out on the streets campaigning against space science. You know, you just don't get it. You could say it's not, you know, it's not a fair analogy, but actually what happened after Challenger is that, first of all, NASA owned it. They came out, the industry was really like behind, you know, what had happened. This is why it's happened. We're going to do an investigation. They took it really seriously. Secondly, Ronald Reagan came out and he did this incredible speech. It's one of the most like top 10 most watched speeches in the US. And he said, look, sometimes you reach for the stars and this happens, but we don't stop reaching. And it really just, people needed a leader at that time. They were so upset. And, you know, school children had watched it live on television. It's one of their most watched, you know, within an hour, most of the population had seen this video of Challenger blowing up live on television. And he owned it. He got out there and he owned it. Nobody protested against it, even though it happened again. It happened again for a similar reason with Columbia. The same thing happened. You still don't get people out protesting, having all these fears about it. And actually, you know what? It's quite complicated tech. You could have those fears about it, but people don't. And I think the problem is that if you don't get on top of these things, if you don't get on top of it, and it's true of all science, all new technologies, so say something like stem cell research, right, can be used to stop children from inheriting diseases that could just completely destroy their lives. You know, look, here's this research that can stop that happening. Instead, you get a headline, it says designer babies, that's what people remember. You've got to get ahead of these things. You've got to be really on point when they happen and communicate why they're good and what good can come out of them. Because sci-fi, you know, and storytelling often goes towards the other side. You know, the Black Mirror scenarios are popular because they make people think about the issues, but they're very negative and they're always the worst case scenarios. All of these technologies have amazing potential applications, same with GMOs, you know, same with vaccines. And if you don't get out and do that, you have to unpick the damage that's done afterwards. And the thing with nuclear is a lot of damage has been done. There is no going back now to the fact that those disasters weren't owned. You know, what happened in the wake of Chernobyl? Germany said that we're going to phase out all nuclear. These things happened. These really strong, powerful storytelling events happened. The narrative was claimed as this really scary thing. I believed it. People just believe it because it's in popular culture. Unpicking it is almost harder, but it can be done. But it's basically almost kind of rebranding nuclear as what it actually is, which is this gift for humanity. It's fire. It's starting. Yes, you know what? When they used fire in the beginning, humans burn themselves sometimes, but look at what it has given us. That's how we need to start talking about it. We're not just, you know, arguing about waste and arguing about radiation. We're talking about this incredible gift that we have. No one does that. No one does, and we've got to come out and own it because it's the only way we're going to shift the narrative, and it's the narrative that people respond to.
Yeah, good. Tim, do you want to add to that? Sorry, you're muted, Tim. I can't.
Yeah, great chemical analogy. Nitroglycerin, fantastic explosive. Anybody who's ever played with it in a lab knows how dangerous it is. It makes the most spectacular explosions. You use it to treat angina. The fact that the chemistry, the science, the physics can produce different effects, people don't realize. And what's happened with nuclear is it's been branded with one particular aspect of its skill. Not all the radiotherapy treatments, not all the diagnostic treatments, not all the powerful things that come from nuclear. We've not told the story properly, and Zion's absolutely right. We don't talk about this stuff in a way that that people can understand. I'm a geek, and I admit it, and I'm not the one that's going to explain it. I need Zion and Trudy and Arun to explain it. But fundamentally, we haven't told the story, and we haven't dealt with the fact that public perception of risk is utterly irrational. So if you look at the way that we deal with transport policy, the price of a life in terms of safety improvements is about £30,000 to save a life on the road, about £1 million to save a life on the railway, and about 10 million to save a life in an aeroplane. It's the same life, you know, it's you or me. But we do not deal with these things on a rational basis as humans. And we have to find a different way of telling the story. And we need to do it PDQ because we are running out of time.
Yeah, right. Okay. We're getting a lot of comments in apparently on the funding of nuclear. This has been referred to already. It's the scale of the investment. Is our private enterprise structure set up in a way that can manage such long-term massive investments, or should it be left to sovereign funds? Let's face it, nearly all the reactors in the world are being built by sovereign funds, and we don't have such a process in this country. When we started the first nuclear program, as it were, the first phase back in the 50s, the government set up a special body to do it and invested a lot of public money in getting it started, and didn't just try and use it by dribbling out bits of incentive, financial incentives into the private sector for a bit of research here and a bit of development there. And the policy was driven by civil servants who had a lot of other things on their minds and a lot of other issues to weld into it, to mesh into it. Maybe it's time for the government to take a new look at how the whole thing is organized, led and financed. Trudy, I'll come back to you.
Maybe about it. I think that's absolutely the case. And the pressure on government to take a stake, and often the comparisons are used around the world where there really isn't any, large reactor that's being built without a significant stake of that country's government is often used. So I think we'll see a change from the Chancellor when he delivers that spending review later on in November. And it is why the energy white paper has been delayed until it can be timed with the message from the Chancellor as well. But I think the answer is there's an opportunity for the pension funds for the smaller reactors, the UK SMR, the advanced modular reactors, which are much smaller as well. There's definitely the opportunity there. But where you're going to need 15 to 20 billion pounds to build 3 AP1000s or a couple of EPRs, clearly the government of that country has got to take a huge financial stake, because ultimately, if it goes pear-shaped, the government is going to have to pick up the price anyway. It is going to fall to government in any case. So nuclear will never be and should not be cheap, but it could certainly be better value, is what I kind of constantly say to Philip Hammond and now certainly Rishi Sunak. I think that's being heard, most definitely. But looking at more innovative solutions for the small modular reactors and the advanced modular reactors, and also looking at the success of Thorpe, the thermal oxide reprocessing plant, which was funded not by this government, but it was an incredible success and ran for many decades at Sellafield. So there are examples of different financial models being used across the nuclear network.
Yeah, you mentioned, Trudy, pension funds, for example. I would have thought that once a nuclear plant is commissioned and up and running, it would be one of the best investments a pension fund could make. But in the 8 or whatever years it takes from the idea to actually being commissioned and running, that seems to be so festooned with risks, changes in legislation, changes in political attitude, and so on. I can't imagine pension funds being prepared to go in that early. But if government went in early and covered the early risks and then had a running nuclear power station to sell to the pension funds, I would have thought that would be so attractive.
Yeah, and those are the conversations I've been having with Guy Opperman, who's a minister in DWP, and also one of our new MPs, Gareth Davies, who's actually worked in this area as well. It's something that I've been speaking with Tom Sampson, who's the chief exec of the UK SMR consortium, about. And you're absolutely right. Government can play a huge part in de-risking this, and actually communities can play a huge part in de-risking as well. And there is, you know, no more of a willing community than mine in Copeland. So we de-risk that as much as we can. We, you know, encourage government to de-risk by financial and policy support. But then the options are out there. I think the regulated asset base has been consulted upon, but I am not going to hold my breath for that one. I think it's unlikely to be deemed a likely way to fund large-scale reactors in the future. And I think the contract for difference is well and truly doomed for future reactor funding as well.
Yes. Tim, do you want to comment?
Yeah. Couple of things. First of all, there's an L in PLC for a reason. The L stands for limits. There are limits to markets. And national infrastructure, national energy policy is an inescapable sovereign risk. So a government in any country has no choice but to make it happen. The question then is how efficiently to do it. And it's about managing the early stage risks. So let's get one of the myths out of the way. You can build the first one on time and on budget. The Hualong-1 reactor, which is the latest Chinese design, went from first nuclear concrete to criticality in 5 years and 5 months, FOAC. Nth of a kind even faster. The smaller ones should be able to be delivered better. We've got to prove it first. But in terms of the financing, it doesn't matter whether it's big or small. Fundamentally, it's about the management of risk. And exactly as you said, Neville, at the point that things are past first refueling and restart, it's an entirely different risk profile. And there is nothing else on this earth that produces returns, sensible, safe returns, that pension funds need than big nuclear. And interestingly, there was a group a couple of years ago looking at buying a fleet of nuclear reactors simply for the revenue stream, the reliable long-term revenue stream to pay pensioners. There's very strong interest in the UK, provided the risks are sensibly managed. And what you can't do with nuclear power stations, whether they're big or small, is you can't put the early risks onto an investor. And if you want to see that at work, look at what happened with Hitachi. So I used to chair the Risk and Audit Committee for Horizon, and we wrote off £2 billion. Now, you don't do that very often, and nobody's going to do that again. There are real limits to markets, and that LNPLC kicks in. So actually states have absolutely no way out of this. They have to take a lead in it and make it happen, and to manage those early stage risks sensibly. And frankly, if Abu Dhabi can do it, why can't we? What's happened? What's special about Abu Dhabi that they can build big reactors quickly? We can do it too. There's nothing magic about it. We built high-speed rail on time and on budget, the first one ever in the UK. Perfectly sensible. The big problems on the big nuclear projects are not nuclear problems, they're project problems. And it's simply about learning how to do this sensibly. But fundamentally, just for those of you on the call who happen to be billionaires, I assume that the billionaires amongst you are in your regular cocktail party conversations, where one of the standard topics is, so which fusion projects, plural, have you invested in? There's really wealthy individuals investing in fusion. Now, if they'll do that, people will invest in nuclear, provided the risk profile is sensible. And that's what we have to do. It's doable. It's perfectly doable. And I'm with Trudy. Government understands now what has to be done. And the minute that these things are in proper operation, post refueling and restart, in a proper market, regulated type market, there's a completely different solution. And the final thing I'd just say is that every form of low carbon generation, electricity generation, energy generation, is virtually zero marginal cost. What sort of market works for that? So we have to redefine the markets too, to make this sensible and rational for our children.
Yeah. Andre, what's the view from the Netherlands?
The view from the Netherlands is that cost, it's not the cost that is the problem, it's not the money that is the problem. It is the fact that you need a long-term nuclear power program in each country or on a European level to give a long-term perspective, because a nuclear power plant, whether it's small or big, will operate, In the past, it was 40 years. It was extended to 60 years. Now it's 80 years already in the US. The modern power plants, they will survive. They will run for 100 years. If you look at Atoms for Peace, Eisenhower, and all the programs in Europe and in the US, we built this fleet of 450 nuclear power plants between 1970 and 1990 in 20 years' time. Why? Because this was a completely different area. We as a society believed in nuclear. We believed that nuclear was the way forward, because already in the 60s, there was the insight and the need to get rid of fossil already in that time, because gas is finite, oil is finite, coal is almost immoral. So that sensibility, that awareness was already there in the 1960s. It wasn't called a Green Deal, it wasn't called a Clean Deal, it was Atoms for Peace. And the US had a big program, the UK had a big program. Europe had Euratom. You know, Europe built, we built in the EU 150 nuclear power plants in 20 years, you know, basically with 2 or 3 designs. And that is completely lacking right now, apart from China. So an important precondition is that as long as governments or societies don't give a long-term perspective and really in a very tough way say, we need nuclear, period, and don't come up with a nuclear program long-term, it won't be financed. As you see, actually recently, we have in the Netherlands, we have the leading party is the VVD, let's call them the liberals. They sort of woke up because the last 10 years they sort of surfed on the green hype. They have now included in their party program for the next year, we will have elections next year in March. They say, the Netherlands, we want 10 nuclear power plants strategically. We want to run the Netherlands largely on nuclear power. And we want to cooperate with other nuclear countries to help build this fleet. So I think the key word is build the fleet. And if you have this perspective of the fleet, it will be financed, no problem.
Okay, all right. Another question. We've touched on this, I know already, but it's often said that young people are against nuclear. Is this true generically? And if so, what can be done about it?
I'll answer this. I actually think it's the opposite. I think there is a big generational divide especially in environmental activism, but it does tend to be older people who are against, and some of the strongest anti-nuclear people I know in the environmental movement are much older. What I found when I kind of came out as pro-nuclear and I wrote an article about it for City AM, I had a lot of people privately message me support, including people in Extinction Rebellion, and they were all much younger people, a lot of them in their 20s, mid-20s, which really surprised me, but they're definitely out there. And actually, you know, it's just that tribal thing that's keeping them from saying it publicly, but they completely believe, you know, they haven't grown up with the same stigma that's been attached for a long time, in my experience. So I would say it's the opposite. That's
an interesting comment. It again, that resonates with one experience I had. I used to have private conversations with the then, he's now late, chairman of Greenpeace UK, because I've always claimed I'm an environmentalist. I started my career as an environmental manager, albeit at a nuclear plant. But he and I agreed on so many things. And on one occasion, he actually said to me, we're wrestling with some pressure now, and this is going back 20 years. We're wrestling with some pressure in Greenpeace to really answer the question, are we sure we're right to oppose nuclear, given what the alternatives are? And the real problem was, how do we manage that? How can we say to people who all their lives have been opposed to nuclear, actually, you're wrong?
Also, I left the Green Party over this issue about, I think 15 years ago, but they actually now have a group called Greens for Nuclear Energy. They're very active on Twitter. So, you know, the tide is kind of turning anyway. I think that shift is happening, and a lot of it is because of younger people coming on board.
That's interesting, isn't it? Arun?
Yeah, just to add to that, I agree with Owen there. I think young people, there's a lot of young people out there that are undecided and don't have that stigma attached to it, but they just haven't really heard of it. And I've kind of done similar presentations to a bunch of them, and they're like, oh, I just didn't know that was a thing. Nuclear is so low carbon. Nuclear is actually very safe. And they're like instantly come on board when they're presented with the facts. So I think we just need to actually get the message out there. And that's why I'm so keen to communicate this as widely as possible, because we need to. And I think there's some messages out there about if the government knows what's best, they should just crack on and do it. But without that public movement and public support behind it won't happen.
Yeah.
And we can look at Germany. Look at Germany, for example. Angela Merkel has got a PhD in quantum chemistry, and she knows what's right. But due to the sentiment in Germany against nuclear, they're shutting down all of their plants by 2025. So I think it's a critical part of shifting the support and getting young people involved.
Will they do it? Will they shut all their nuclear plants down by 2025? Does anybody on the panel think that? I remember the Swedes shut everything down. But it didn't happen.
Seems to be the plan. I've actually spoken to people, activists in Germany on this, and there's a big pushback. So it's not actually that most of the public is anti-nuclear. The polls show that it's kind of split 50-50. Why it's gone that way, I don't know, but people are more concerned about climate action. Younger people are becoming more aware of this as a solution. And actually, it might be that these really active activists, I mean, they're actually going out and doing banner drops and petitioning politicians and doing, really active pro-nuclear activism. It might be that they help to shift things back the other way, but it's interesting to watch at the moment because no one really knows what will happen.
Andre, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, the Atomausstieg is actually a law, and Germans are very obedient. Yes, all these nuclear power plants will be closed. The last will be closed in 2022, I believe. There are demonstrations against it. The political party Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, is very pro-nuclear and basically fighting medical, but it's a law and it will happen. My prediction is that you already see today that Germany, together with Denmark, they have the highest electricity prices in Europe. And once we get to the stage where the whole, as Tim indicated, the whole energy infrastructure needs to be changed to sort of collect all these Mickey Mouse currents coming from solar panels and coming from windmills and all that, the costs of electricity in Germany will increase exponentially. So my prediction is that by the middle of this decade, around 2025, Germany will be in crisis, as other countries who will go green, basically. And then the real problems behind green, the decentralization, particularly the grids that are used, that are needed, the storage that is impossible. I predict a crisis in the European Union, and then I predict that there will be a return to nuclear, basically forced by complaining citizens.
Okay.
Because the green path forward technically simply doesn't work.
While you've more or less got the floor, Andre, we've got a question here. What's going to happen to trans-European collaboration after Brexit?
Yeah, wow, that's almost political. That's a big question. Well, I think the key. Shall we confine it to the energy question?
Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, today you see basically Brussels energy policy. Brussels green energy policy is basically Berlin policy. Basically, Berlin is enforcing Brussels what to do, and that actually goes mad to such an extent that France is now being forced to close perfectly functioning nuclear power plants to make space for solar and wind, because that is the European Green Deal. Well, this is stupid. And Macron knows this. I think what will happen is that the big opposition will start in France. There's a great support for nuclear in the Eastern European countries. Poland has plans to build 6 nuclear power plants. They actually have to get rid of coal. So you see a division within Europe of pro-nuclear and anti-nuclear countries. And I think the turning point will be, the key question is, what will Macron do? What will France do? Will they allow reducing their nuclear in favor of solar and wind? Or will they go in the opposite direction and actually push back on Brussels to say, we need a clean deal, we need not a green deal, but we need a clean deal. And you see many initiatives going on, coming from Eastern Europe, coming also from the Netherlands, but also from a big academic society. They say, we need not a green deal, we need a clean deal. We need a level playing field for nuclear. So, and in the next year, there's actually a battle. I think that is, to summarize, there is a battle going on. I don't know how fast it will go and what precisely what the outcome will be, but at some stage, Brussels will have to embrace nuclear again.
Perhaps it's as well, we in this country are out of that argument for the time being then.
Yeah. Well, I think you are in the lucky position that you have a sort of level playing field. Not completely yet.
Not everybody thinks so, but
in Brussels right now, due to the mandatory targets for green energy, so solar, wind and biomass, nuclear is basically being discriminated. That is a fact. And even Commissioner Timmermans actually openly discriminates nuclear.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we've had quite a long session on this. What I'm going to suggest now is that each of our panelists just takes a couple of minutes to bring out what for them is the main point to emerge in this afternoon's discussion. Perhaps I'll do it in reverse order this time. Tim, do you want to start on this? Just your main points.
Thank you. I think 3 for me. Firstly, the importance of communication is absolutely vital. We have to do a much better job of getting the public at large to understand the consequences for our society of getting this right or wrong and the legacy that's involved in that. Those are decisions being taken now, and the public need to understand the sheer scale of this. To go with that, if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, we weren't prepared for that, and we sure as heck are not prepared for the climate change crisis that's to follow, and it's far worse. And action has to happen now. We cannot wait for some clever piece of science. And the final thing is to recognize that if it's treated in a rational, sensible, engineering-led way, nuclear delivers electricity at prices that are competitive with any of the renewables without the intermittency cost, but they're all needed. And it's not an economic challenge to bring nuclear costs down. They're already capable of being down if it's treated sensibly and rationally. But fundamentally, states cannot abrogate responsibility for making this happen. It's an irreducible responsibility of the state. And it's going to be an interesting comparison over the next 5 to 10 years tops as to which states around the world see common sense and create a proper future for their citizens, and which ones, frankly, play games.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Thanks. Arun.
Yeah, I'm here. Net zero needs nuclear. There's no real choice about it. So that's my first point. I think we need to commit to it. And the scale of the challenge, I think everybody's demonstrated that it's huge. We need to decarbonize 85% of what we use already, as well as building another 50 to 60% on top of that in the next 30 years. So how do we do that? Nuclear, obviously, and we need to get on the ground. We need to have great nuclear activism going on and get people involved. And all those people on the fence, we need to get them involved and campaign for this. So for the people at home, I'd really suggest strongly writing to your MP, even like your European Parliament members and Angela Merkel and whoever you can think of that will have a big sway. Germany, as you said, has a big sway to Brussels and the UN in general. So we need to think about how the World Bank can finance these for developing nations. And the more you write and show your public support for this, the quicker we get there.
Good. Yeah, great. SONE, what are the important points for you?
Doing what I'm doing. I am working on a Europe-wide strategy with activists, climate activists across Europe, who are coming out as pro-nuclear, who are doing banner drops, who are going for swims on the beach with bananas to make points about radiation. I think this is, this is just what Arun suggested, but I just wanted to say this is happening. And I think actually the biggest takeaway from this is that we can't do this alone. We need people to actually come out and say that they believe these, publicly. We need you to come out and say it publicly. We need people to advocate. We need you to canvass MPs. We need you to write to your MPs and turn up at your local meetings and talk about nuclear. You cannot talk about climate change without talking about nuclear. You've got to have a seat at the table. The IPCC has made this very clear. But we're all aware that it's not happening. And if we don't, if we don't make this shift soon, we are going to lock ourselves into far more global warming than, than is morally conscionable at this point. So I think, the biggest takeaway is we all need to keep doing what we're doing. But, if you're pinging us questions and you need to get involved as well, I really urge people to be as vocal about this as possible. It's one thing to be vocal about the climate crisis, but if you're not talking about actual solutions, then we are not any closer to solving that climate crisis than we were 20 years ago when I first got involved with climate activism.
Right, yeah. Andre?
I am in a campaigning mode already since more than 10 years, telling this beautiful narrative about nuclear to the general public, writing in a newspaper, participating in videos, participating in these kinds of activities, participating in all kinds of panels. I think the industry has to do it as well. Please, industry, come out of your expert caves. Start campaigning, because it's really about all reaching out to the general public and explaining all the benefits of nuclear, because the Greens are in the majority, and it's also a matter of quantity, and we are simply still not visible enough.
Okay, thanks. Trudy, you have the last slot.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say how really interesting it's been actually to listen to everybody's points made in a different way. Obviously the experience that different folks on the panel have got has really shone through, and I think that's brilliant. So what I am taking away is to become more knowledgeable on how we're planning for COP26 and to do my level best to ensure that nuclear is in the room, outside the room, and very much part of the conversation leading up to, during and post COP26. So that's definitely a task I will take up. I think the myth busting that Andre provided us with was really, really interesting. Andre, I just want to take you with me everywhere I go and, relay this information. So I'd like to, touch base with you after this presentation, because your knowledge is fantastic.
Thank you.
So I look forward to working with everybody on this panel, and I would encourage everybody watching this, absolutely write to your MP. Don't think too much about it. I get hundreds of emails a day, and I'm just a backbencher. So be aware that those letters need to be short and snappy. It's really easy to find out your MP's email address. It's usually firstname.secondname.mp@parliament.uk, but just check that by Googling them, or whichever search engine you prefer. And please do that, and maybe put in a bit of an ask to say, what are you doing about getting nuclear energy up there on the political agenda, rather than just imparting your own desire? That'll get the MP to do a little bit of research. And the two greatest nuclear nuisances, I have to remind you, are myself and Virginia Crosby. And I know that both of us would love to work with anybody who wants to see nuclear promoted politically, professionally and personally.
Thanks, Trudy. Thanks for that offer. Well, it's been very interesting. Lots of different views, but not conflicting. I've been searching, as a chairman should, for conflict, but I haven't really found much by way of conflict. Everyone seems to be on the same hymn sheet, but perhaps singing not quite the same tune. The big point and it comes up again and again, is communication. And as an industry, whether it's ourselves or pressure groups or whatever, we've really got to get better at this communication thing. I like for me, the new point that Zion brought out was the attitudes of young people. It's so easy just to presume what we've been told over the decades, and it may no longer be true. And I do like that. I found that a very hopeful interpretation of what's going on, I must admit. We've talked about the state role, and there is a role for the state in this. Clearly, it's not going to happen if government actually doesn't make it very clear that it wants nuclear to happen. A few initiatives strung together don't make a policy. I don't really need to lecture Trudy on that, but it's true. I do like some of the forceful points that came out, like net zero needs nuclear, absolutely, and also the idea that we do need to get some nuclear activism generated and going. You know, people like Zion need to be given, if you like, more room and more support to actually get all that out. And the fearful message is that if we don't, as a society, prepare properly for this future with the climate change, then being unprepared like we were for the pandemic, it seems, isn't excusable. It really isn't. There's plenty of warnings, and somehow society's got to make it work. And then finally, there's a determination from everybody to contribute in the best way they can to the COP26 climate change conference next year. And we're not after finding, if you like, personal glory or advancing one's particular own argument. It's working together, see if we can get some common messages and pushed in every way. Right, having said all that, can I say thank you to our panelists. I hope you felt I've been fair and not unduly difficult with anybody. Can I thank people who sent in questions as well? I'm sorry if we didn't get round to your particular question. And I do want to thank Miguel, Sophie, and the Nuclear Institute's Young Generation Network for their technical support in this. Thank you, everybody.